Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Ben Stewart Podcast. I'm so excited to have you back. And if you remember 2 episodes ago, we had on Robert Forte. And the same day that I met Robert Forte out at Foster and Kimberly Gamble's place out in SoCal, California, I met a really amazing couple, Jill and Madhava. And Madhava is an anesthesiologist. He is our guest for today. He is the author of this book, Woke, an anesthesiologist's view. He's a physician, an engineer, a board-certified anesthesiologist with 18 years of clinical experience. Through his close observation of patients under anesthesia, he began to suspect that we may be very well misconceiving what it means to be aware, alive, and awake. So he asks, what else are we misconceiving? He invites us to consider another way of looking at the world that we have created around us. He is also somebody that is... I've watched a bunch of interviews on him, and I've dug into his book, and he's somebody that's really diving deeply into what happens before we get to the debate. What are our biases? How do we think? He even looks at the mystery of anesthesia and the way that it acts on consciousness. This is going to be a really important conversation for us to have here, so we can start getting to some of the fundamental parts of how we arrive at having a conclusion that we wish to debate out there, or a conclusion about what's happening in the world. And mind you, we're living in a world post-2020 that we need to refine our discernment far more than we have in the past. It's finally time for us as humanity to take that step rather than waiting from some external source to give us the official answer. So I can't wait for this amazing podcast coming up for you guys. Stick around on the Ben Stewart Podcast. I get really hyped when I hear that music.
Hype mode.
Madhava Setty, I want to thank you so much for being here, man. I haven't seen you in a while. I got to see Jill there briefly right beforehand, but thank you so much for taking the time to be on the podcast.
Ben, it's great to be with you, and you too, Gordo. I've been really looking forward to this conversation, and just for the audience here, we were trying to get a date right to make this happen, and I was like, we got to do this now. I want to talk to these guys like today, and I'm glad it happened when it's happening. I've been looking forward to this conversation for weeks. Thank you for bringing me on.
Yeah, this is going to be great. And it's quite fortuitous that 2 episodes ago we had on Robert Forte. Did you see that episode?
I sure did.
Yeah.
He's a good man, a good soul.
He is, and he spoke wonders of this book. He on that podcast, he said, I'm so grateful to him for having wrote that book, because it kept me from having to take the time to write it, because it's all that I would have wanted to arrive at. So I really appreciate that, man. And I appreciate where you've gone with your career as an anesthesiologist to where you are now. I'd really love to know a little bit of the stepping stone process that brings you to having written this book. Like, what are just some of the things that led you to this moment?
Well, I was born in 1966. No, this is, what is the path? That's a really, really good question. And what I would like to start off with is that before I was a physician and an anesthesiologist, I was an engineer. And turns out I was recruited by the defense industry right out of college. And I was an electrical engineer. And I worked on the space station program first. And then I got involved with a research and development firm in Cambridge that's now defunct. They were just really like amazing minds that I got to work with. These were like true scientists. And we were designing a system that was supposed to be able to track submarines under the ice cap, and using active sonar. And for all of you who are interested in this, and forgive me if I'm going on too long, but back then, we had another superpower that was a existential threat to this country. And, the problem with that, besides the fact that, we shouldn't be fighting at all, but the problem with that is that, there was so much firepower that were in these nuclear submarines, right? which would be fine because as soon as they leave port, we know where they are. But every single, captain of a nuclear sub will go immediately to the ice cap. Why? Because once they go into the ice, you can't track them anymore, and then they emerge someplace else, and nobody knows where they are. That's kind of where we are with that. And so the technology was supposed to hopefully designed to find these things under the ice cap. So I was 26 years old. I found myself, literally 100 miles from the North Pole in March, April of 1992. And, it was a huge adventure for me. I was a young guy, and I was like, I can't believe I'm like up here on the ice pack, drilling holes into the ice to lower these, hydrophones in the water, and we're trying to do these experiments. We had a nuclear sub of ours running, exercises, and then we tried to track where it was to validate our system. Anyway, the point is that at the end of this like crazy 7 weeks that I was up there, it was time to pack up. And what do? It's too expensive to bring all this equipment back to the States. We just took our computers and our data, and we went home, and we just, sank everything into the ocean. And any debris we had left over, all of our garbage, we just burned it. And at that moment, I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? How did I get involved with this kind of pursuit? And I got home, and a month later, I started applying to medical school. And so that's where it led. And what I would like to say about that is when I entered medical school, I was, an odd student because most people in my class came directly from undergrad, having studied biology, chemistry, liberal arts. And I was sort of struck by, how amazing the body is. Like, it's been designed really well. It's resilient. It's adaptable. It has so much like beauty to the body. And as an example, I'll use anesthesia, for example. Okay. An average person weighs 70 kilograms, right? I can give you a medicine on the order of micrograms, millionths of a gram, like 100 micrograms of fentanyl, and it changes your whole experience. So what does that mean? I'm looking at this, from a purely, stoichiometry kind of way, is I'm giving you something that weighs billions of times less than you, billions, and it changes your whole experience. If anything, it leads us to the understanding that, holy cow, this is an incredibly well-balanced, thing, our bodies, or whatever you want to call it, when you can throw in the tiniest pebble, if you will, and the entire, Olympic-sized pool starts reverberating differently. So, anyway, that's just some way of looking at it. I don't know. What's the question you asked me again?
Well, no, that was good. It was the way you kind of arrived at writing the book, Woke. So the stepping stones, and you gave that, and you actually said space station development. I kind of want to just quickly ask you about that.
Well, I worked for McDonnell Douglas Space Systems Company in 1988 to 1989, and I was a 21-year-old engineer, and I didn't know anything. After all, I just went to college. How much can you know after going to college, right? Nothing. And I was given the task of looking over documents that had to do with, can we tell NASA, basically the government, that we're building our part of the space station in a way that will allow it to expand as new technology emerges? Like, are we accommodating for that in the space? Or do we have space for fiber optic cables when they come online? Do we have space for, better computers? Like, that was my job. And I was just going through documents. That's what my job was. And I did that for a year. And I said, this is ridiculous. I want to go be an engineer. I just don't want to, so that's what that was about.
Okay. So arriving at this book, I want to get into the book and maybe the process of writing this book.
Yeah.
The name Woke, why you chose that, and the directions that you went in there, which, let me just get to the, see if I can find the table of contents here. Tale of Two Trains, Who Done It. I guess these aren't all explicit on what we're talking about here. You talk about, from having gone through it, you talk about the mystery of anesthesiology or anesthesia, and I'd love to get into that. But from there, you're also talking about banking, which is something we've talked about on this. You talk about September 11th as being a red pill moment for you. And I was living in Pennsylvania, I mean, maybe an hour or so from Shanksville, PA, all the way to ETs and military secrecy. I mean, all these topics that we get into, this covers a wide array of topics. I would really like to know, what was it in your backstory that led you to being like, I need to author this specific book?
Well, that's a really good question. And yes, forgive me for forgetting what that was. You asked me that before. It's really not possible for me to answer that question without telling you about the red pill moment. I don't know if we want to go there, because
let's go there right away.
Yeah. Well, there was a moment 4 years ago, less than 4 years ago, that changed my life completely. It is a true red pill, moment. I don't like to use that word very often, but we all know what that means, right? It's like some experience that just, like suddenly you see everything differently. And what it was, I credit my wife, Jill, who you mentioned before. She's an amazing human being. And she was, just scrolling through videos on her phone. And she's like, yeah, this never made sense to me. And I said, what are you looking at? And she showed me a 30-second clip. 30-second video. That's all it took. And this video, are you queuing it up, Gordo?
Yeah, I'll cue it up.
Anyway,
here.
But to explain what it is a clip of a building that I had never seen before fall like that. And I found out that it was about 7 seconds it fell. What was really shocking to me about this random building was that Jill told me that this happened on September 11th. On 9/11, this building fell, and I said, you've got to be kidding me. Where was this building? And the building was, as we all know now, it's World Trade Center 7, about, I don't know, a couple hundred yards, maybe less than that, from the North Tower in the World Trade Center complex. The building fell at 5:20 p.m. on September 11th, 2001. It was not hit by a plane. And that right away was stunning to me. But what was even more incredible was the manner in which this building fell. And of course, I'm sure your audience is, aware of the conversation around this building. Mm-hmm. And I looked at that and I said, there's no way. I want to know what the official story says about this. Like, forget about the fact that I didn't know after 16 years. I was in Philadelphia at the time in 2001. And I was a resident in anesthesia at University of Pennsylvania, and we had all prepared for a huge number of trauma injuries that were going to be shipped from New York City to Philadelphia when their hospitals get overwhelmed. So I was on call. I was, chief resident at Penn at the time, and I kept everyone in the hospital because we just expected we were going to get nailed with, trauma. Broken bones, crush injuries, all of this stuff, even though we were, 90 miles away. Nobody showed up, which was great. But what's scary is that all the people, or most of the people in the building, died. They got crushed. Moreover, and by the building, I'm talking about the Twin Towers. Moreover, the first responders, when that thing was on fire, by that thing I'm talking about the North and South Tower, the Twin Towers, when they were on fire, they were rushing towards the building. They had no problems running into the building. Why? Because it was made of steel. And we're talking about fire here. There's no way, firefighters knew that the building was not going to collapse. Maybe they get stuck. They would have to find a way to get around the fires, and, there's going to be smoke inhalation. But the idea that the building was going to come down, and by the building, I mean any one of those buildings, come down in a matter of seconds, was beyond their conception. Of course, at the time, I was, training in anesthesiology. I didn't really think about, the idea. I was just happy that, but not happy. I was sad that, these people all died, but we didn't see any trauma that night. And it was only much later, in 2017, where Jill showed me this video, and I didn't know about the building. And it is, again, it's the manner in which the building fell that I said, this can't happen. Unless, not just unless, show me what the official explanation says. Did you want to interject here? I don't want to keep talking if you have something.
Well, no, you're doing a great job. I was actually just gonna ask, like, so what is the official explanation? Because everyone, already there's people in the chats that are sounding off like they've been skeptical of the official story as well. But let's just go through, like, you corrected me. I, for some reason, thought, when we were talking beforehand, for some reason thought that the 9/11 Commission report did not mention Building 7 at all. I know exactly where I got that, and that was a film. So I'm appreciative that you actually, like, corrected that in my mind, and this does show that a lot of the times, even people like myself, where, like, I can rattle off what I know and then sometimes interject something I think I know, and it's incorrect. So I love that, actually, and I love being honest about that, because we're going to get into bias here in a bit. But when you talk about the 9/11 Commission report, you said it was actually in there. So I asked you, what was the official explanation of Building 7?
That's a really good question. So I want to be very precise, and good for you for admitting that you didn't have all the facts, but you're not exactly wrong either. What most people don't know is that there's the 9/11 Commission report, and then there are the supporting technical documents from the National Institute for Standards and Technology. This is a subset of the Department of Commerce. And what you have to understand, for those of us who are not scientists, is that the National Institute for Standards and Technology are a group of some of the best scientists in the world. From applied mathematicians. Are we still there? I'm frozen here.
Yes.
Good?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Applied mathematicians, scientists, chemists, metallurgy experts. These people literally set the standards for science, what we know about how to do things correctly. So they were tasked with solving, or at least explaining, why the buildings came down the way they did. So there's the 9/11 Commission report that talks about, where did the terrorists come from, and where were they the night before, and all of these things. But the actual technical explanation comes from the Department of Commerce, the National Institute for Standards and Technology. Okay. What did they say about the building? Well, this is what's really fascinating. The first thing I want to say is that they did not have a explanation for almost 7 years. 7 years. We're talking about World Trade Center 7 alone. They came up with their explanation about the Twin Towers, and I can talk about this forever, but let's just go about World Trade Center 7. What they said was that the building came down because of a phenomenon known as thermal expansion. When things get hot, things expand, and this, in effect, made a beam dislodge from a column on one of the floors, floor 12. This is column 79 of 80 columns that run the length of the building. And because this got dislodged from the heat from a fire, the building did this.
Yeah, so did this, as in, for those who will just hear this, he's basically showed that the building came down at free fall speed. There was nothing really even trying to resist it. It's almost as if that one column 79, or that beam dislodging, completely eradicated all the structural integrity of the rest of the building as it came down at free fall speed.
That's right. Yeah, well said, Ben. This is exactly what I'm saying. Not only did it come down at free fall speed, perhaps even more damning is the fact that it came down symmetrically, right? We're talking about one of 80 columns failing, and the entire building behaves uniformly, right? And so, here's the thing, right? I'm just going to throw this out there. In our world today, people fall on different sides of the story about 9/11. I believe the official story. I believe that's all BS, or I don't know. How many of these people do you think actually read the technical documents from the National Institute for Standards and Technology?
Less
Zero.
than 5%.
Yeah, less than 5%. You're right.
Okay, yeah.
I would say it's closer to zero, but
You're probably
it's a
right.
small number, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yet they claim to know. What do they know? No, they actually know what their trusted source is telling them about what it says. That's I think we're going to hit this point later on.
Yes.
Do you know, or are you believing? No, that's two different things. So in order to know, you must read the document. And they said that that's what happened. One of these columns fall. How are they going to prove it? And here's the very first thing is that if you talk to structural engineers or demolition experts, they'll say it was blown up. I mean, it was obviously blown up because of the way it fell. So what you should do if you're going to be legitimate scientists is check the dust for explosive residues. Very easy, right? That's what NIST does. They have, chemists there. And then if there's none there, then we must come up with another explanation. So this is where the first distortion is did you check for explosive residues? And Shyam Sundar, who is the lead investigator for the Building 7 collapse at NIST, said, no, we didn't check. And then he was asked, why didn't you check? And in the NIST documents, they say, well, there was no reason to check because nobody heard any explosions. So there's no reason to check. So right away, we should be like, but it fell just like, it was being blown up and you didn't check. Given the fact that they didn't check, and so we cannot rule it in, meaning we can't prove that it was because of the evidence of explosives, we are now stuck as how are you going to prove them wrong if the evidence was not sought? You follow me? Anything else you want to say here before I keep going, Ben? I can.
Well, no, I mean, this is a good logical train of thought, is that imagine we're trying to debate any topic. I'm trying to, just think of something. Imagine we're trying to debate a topic, and then when you try and rely on the evidence, much of it is missing. And when I say much of it, I mean the evidence that would clearly either say yes or no to a suspicion. Mm-hmm. So that's a really important aspect to bring up, is you're saying that would be and that is probably, what was the company you said that they do that?
NIST.
NIST, yeah.
So NIST, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So NIST, NIST. Okay. Mm-hmm. Do they do that probably looking for alternative explanations to other kinds of arson and building fires and things along those lines, correct? Like,
absolutely. So they're tasked.
So that's their job.
That's their job. Their job is to set the standards for how things are built. And when things fail, their job is to figure out why on earth did it fail, and why did it fail like that? What is wrong with the way we built the building? That's what they're tasked to do. And anyway, like you said, we don't have the definitive evidence because it was not searched for. And so without definitive evidence that would prove that it was blown up, how can we, as open-minded, logical observers who see the building and say, it certainly seems like it was blown up, but you're saying that it wasn't. You're saying that it was thermal expansion on floor 12. So diving deeper, if you'll allow me to keep going.
Yeah, please.
How do they prove that their theory was correct? Well, because they didn't look for evidence, they had to demonstrate that their theory is correct. And so what they did was build a computer model, right? That's what you do. It's like, I'm not going to build another 47-story steel structure and prove that it goes down like that. We'll build a computer model. And that's what they did. And they said, that the model demonstrates exactly what was observed, and this is the hallmark. This is the foundation for science. Your theory has to match observed behavior. Did the model behave the way the building did? The answer is no, it did not. I mean, first of all, the great thing about computer models is that you can adjust the model to behave any way you want to. For example, they model each part of this building, each component of the building, a beam, a column, whatever it is, and you assign various tolerances to it. At what temperature does it fail? What are the forces that are acting upon it? And then you set the computer in motion and you see how your model behaves. Okay, that's the best we can do. It's pretty damn good compared to where we were 100 years ago, where perhaps we would have looked for evidence. I don't know. But anyway, so that's what they did, and their model does not behave in a way that is consistent with what was observed. So let me be very clear here. They have proven that their theory is wrong. That's what they've done. Because their model did not do what we observed, the only logical conclusion is your theory is wrong. I mean, that's the scientific perspective, yet they were allowed to throw out this theory, which they could not confirm and prove wrong, and that is the official narrative, is it was thermal expansion. This went on, and for those of you who do not know, there were engineers around the world that were screaming for a retraction of that kind of argument, and they were not heard. I'm very, very lucky to be in touch with some of these great minds, Tony Zambotti and Richard Gage. They're really my heroes because, they're extremely look, just go after the science, people. Let's not get thrown by media and narratives. What does the science say? So their model, they proved that they were wrong, but that's not being recognized. So this is the kind of world we're living in. It doesn't matter, what the science says. What is the story you want to tell? And we just give it to whoever we want to, and that's the story that's being told. Now, here's what's interesting, Ben and Gordo. Years later, an independent study that came from the University of Alaska in Fairbanks re-examined the data around Building 7. And what's really interesting here is that this guy really was very reluctant. And for you listeners out there, I really recommend you watch the movie Seven. SEVEN, or the number 7. It's basically a documentary that tells you exactly what the University of Alaska, an independent research team, did. And here's what's really interesting. And sadly, I did not put this in my book. I wish I did. But cutting through the whole stuff, the whole thing, they made a computer model as well. Okay. And they put in NIST's theory that this one column got, unseated. And guess what? Their model did exactly what NIST's model did. It did not replicate the observed behavior. But this is what they did. This is what's really fascinating, is they took it one step further. It's a model. It's a computer model. You can make it do anything you want to, right? They said, what do we have to do with all of the columns and beams to make it look exactly like what we saw on camera? The whole thing
reverse engineer what we saw to see what some of the causes could be.
Yes. Do we need to have 2 columns go? Do we need to have 8 columns go? Do we need to have some, what can we do to make it look exactly like what we observed? The only way they could do that is that they had to synchronously blow the internal columns, have them fail instantaneously and completely, followed by the external columns in a synchronous way, right? With millisecond intervals in between, something like that. Don't quote me on milliseconds, but very quick. That's the only way they could get the building to fall exactly in the way that we observed. There's no way a fire can do that. There's only one way that a building or the columns can fail like that. You have to have a timed explosive device be detonated across the floors, or whatever. I don't know how. I'm not a demolition expert, but that's how they have to fail. You cannot have a fire do that. So the evidence is like, it's proven scientifically that that building blew up. Somebody blew that building up. Let's be very clear. There's no question at all that that building blew up. It blew up. I don't know, you know, and here's where we get lost. And, you know, I know you want to say something, but we immediately jump to, who did it then? Who did it? Who are the perpetrators? Who knows? We're just talking about science here. We're talking about physics. Right. It doesn't matter. The point is, someone blew the building up.
And if people want to look into this, it's an extensive analysis they did.
Yes.
It's seriously an extensive analysis. I'm not an engineer, but you are, and people who have an engineering background, it really looks like this holds ground with, you know, the standards of what you would require with something of this type of analysis. So if people really want to deep dive into this, I'll post this in the show notes after we wrap. But it is a severely extensive analysis, so it's just important. As Dr. Setty is saying here, this is this is stuff you can really follow the science on and see that it has serious forensic evidence to back up these things. And I think that's a big part of all this, is it's so easily quickly ridiculed because of who is this particular person delivering the message. And it's so important for people like yourself and people who have a background and expertise to speak to this truth, because it's a lot harder to ridicule somebody who has credibility and has a background in this. It's similar to a lot of the subjects I'm sure we'll talk about that are happening nowadays, whether it's in the world of virology or whatever. But, you know, I think people automatically assume all experts agree on everything. And so here we are. This
is, you know, thank you for saying that, Gordo. And Madhava, like what you're talking about, like, I think that's sufficient for us to make that one point. There's so much more that we could go into on this one topic, but the reason why I'm saying that is because the way that I always looked at it, right, like my own personal story with 9/11 was I got back home to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, which is not too far away from New York. It's just a few hours by car. I'd just gotten back from boot camp. Is that right? Yeah. So I just got back from boot camp for the Air Force, and literally a couple days later, I'm back at my parents' house, and my mom wakes me up and says, "Ben, we're being attacked." And, you know, I didn't have any clue what she was talking about, but I didn't feel any urgency. It was strange. I didn't feel any urgency. I just got up, I looked at the TV, I saw what was happening, and I was like, huh. And then, you know, I had a friend coming over to pick me up. We were going to go to a local community college just to check it out. And we went there and we visited some other friends, and everyone's eyes were glued on these TVs, and there was people crying. And I wondered, like, why am I not having an emotional reaction? Like everyone's glued to the TV around this, and I didn't have that kind of a reaction. Beyond that specifically, the reason why I think this is important to look at is because I also look at the esoteric side of things, and what came down was like the Twin Towers. But if you look in the tarot, you have the Tower card, and the Tower card shows a tower being struck by lightning and it crashing down and people falling from it. And the message of that card, the significance of that card, is that a large external structural edifice, and it doesn't have to be a literal physical structure, but it could be like a psychological aspect of yourself or the way you get on in life, has experienced utter annihilation. You can never go back to the way it was. You need to go forward by learning what it was that tower collapsing was meant to teach you. And so there's a really good author and researcher. His name's Michael Tsarion. He goes way deep into the alien visitation and genetic manipulation is one of his books. Atlantis, Alien Visitation, Genetic Manipulation. But he also goes all the way into stuff like 9/11, and he shows that this coming down, the World Trade Centers coming down, that it marks a very specific time in history. And I don't think we knew exactly what it was back then. And there were, of course, some people right away that were like, I'm not buying it. It took me several years to start being like, wait a minute, this whole story kind of stinks. But the thing I guess that I want to say to move this conversation along is that what that did to me, and what I think it did to a lot of people, was the official story was so flimsy that it caused for people such as yourself and myself and many, many other people to start asking deeper questions about what is true. What do I feel to be is actually true? Because I hear what the official story is, and my bias is to simply, even though I was a big punk rock kid, and I was in love with Rage Against the Machine and punk and this whole vibe of like not anti-establishment, but like question authority. But still, I didn't realize, even though I had that kind of MO in my band, I would still just listen to official stories. And if nothing blatantly stood out to me, I would just be like, okay, I guess that's what happened. But most people do that. And when you're looking at that video and you're hearing the official story, for a lot of people, like engineers and people who are just a little bit more meticulous with their research, are like, wait a minute, my eyes aren't showing me what like my belief is, or how my belief came to be based upon the narrative. So there's something very special about that event. And I don't mean special as in good in any other way than when tragedy happens, there's always an opportunity to grow and learn from it. And that seems like what this is. This is the turning point where I feel like a lot of people decided, you know what? I don't mind being called a conspiracy theorist anymore if not believing the official story about Building 7 alone, let alone the rest of the story around 9/11, because there are a lot of holes. But I don't mind being called a conspiracy theorist if this is the kind of crap that you need to believe to be called a coincidence theorist or a complicity theorist or whatever, like a good citizen. Yeah. So I guess I kind of want to move deeper into, we talked about bias, and we talked about our biases and how we need to have a better self-referential process to understand whether, if we believe something, why do we believe it? Do we believe it because we did our due diligence? Do we believe it because there's an actual logical train of thought? Or do we believe it because of a trusted source, and or the fact that we, and I mentioned this before, I believe that a lot of people, they're not actually looking for truth. They're really not looking for, like, I want you to rip away all the ego and rip away all the illusion. I want to see reality for what it really is. Most people, deep down, they may say that on the surface, but deep down, they really just want to feel comfortable. They want to feel accepted, loved, and safe. For the most part, safe, if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So I would really love for you to take us into what you believe about our own personal biases that we have that affect our way of coming to a logical, cohesive train of thought about anything that we hear on the news.
Yeah. Gosh, you said a lot there that is all worthy of consideration. And I'm going to answer that question, but this is a very key point about that. Forget about all of the math and stuff. Here's the thing is, when some people look at that building fall, they'll say, oh, yeah, well, it could have happened that way. And other people look at it and say, no way could it happen the way you just told me. And it has nothing, honestly, very little to do with, are you a structural engineer? Do you know anything about metallurgy? It has nothing to do with it. I've talked to engineers, people that I went to MIT. I have friends from there, and they say, oh, what are you talking about? So why is it that some people agree with it and some people don't? Why do some people have cognitive dissonance and some people just accept it, right? And that is the reason why I wrote the book. So that's the answer to the question, is like, oh my God, what's behind all of this? Where are we getting lost in the way we are perceiving reality? So forgive me if I derailed your train of thought, but that I think is a very important point. And so I believe you said, why do we, what do we want to know? Do we want to believe things, know things, Maslow and like the need for safety? there's a real big difference between knowing and believing. And if you cut right down to the essence of, how do we know what we know? Let's look at it. Let's really just openly look at how do we know what we know. There's, pure experience, right? It's like your own individual experience. Let's put that aside. It's like, I'm feeling this, I'm feeling emotion. Of course it's real. I know it's real because I'm feeling it. But when someone tries to give you an explanation for why it is you're seeing what you're seeing, do you know, or are you believing, right? And when we say, I'm going to go with what the mainstream media is saying about something, why do you believe them, right? It comes down to some sort of faith, some sort of knowing that what that person is saying is true. And what is the source of that? Like, why are we so certain about something? And it's not cognitive. It really isn't, and this is what I'm trying to explore in my book, which is knowing itself originates from something that's non-conceptual, and I call this intuition. I don't know what you want to call it, but when you decide that I'm going to believe what that person is saying, based on what? It's intuitive, honestly. I mean, you could say like, well, that person has never lied to me. Okay, but that doesn't mean he's not lying to you now, right?
Right.
That's sort of where I wanted to go with the book, because I couldn't believe that my colleagues could not see this for what it is. I mean, I was like, how on earth are you not listening to what I'm saying? There's no way. And I really tried hard to talk myself out of where I was going with this. And after 2 weeks of like looking at it, I was like, it's wrong. And then that's where the tower fell, if you will, for me, Ben. It's like, oh my God, we are lost because we are believing the wrong things. And it doesn't matter how many letters you have next to your name, that does not make you more aware of what's going on. In fact, it very well could make you less aware of what's going on, because you have fallen into these ruts of systematic thinking about things in one way. Yeah, sorry if I digressed there. Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, Gordo. So people are saying they can't hear you for some reason.
I'm sorry. I had myself muted for the chat, but not here.
Oh shit, we could all hear you. You made some damn good points, but unfortunately, we don't have time for you to go. I'm just kidding.
It's all good. It's all good.
Oh, that was phenomenal, man.
It's like the Forrest Gump. It's like the Forrest Gump moment. Yeah, where they're like, "Oh, your mic's not on, Forrest,"
and
he's like, "And that's all." That was straight. But just anyways though, but just my question though, getting on this is just, I had my own journey I was kind of saying, but I think the key part of all of this is the psychological component I was saying, and the fear component of, if this is true, what are the implications of if this is true? And so, and I know that's something that I still process and go through sometimes of knowing the, once you sort of, it's the Matrix analogy of do you want to know that the steak is real or not, and taste it and live in the Matrix or not? It's the idea of ignorance is bliss. It's all these metaphors we've heard, but once you really do look at these things, I do think it's very possible. I think, Ben, you really helped me in my own journey with this, and I had other friends who I met in particular Gaia, who really helped me to say, like, look, we can process these things and come away constructively stronger and with a better design and a better game plan to where in the future this doesn't occur. Where we've created better design. I've really learned to really focus on design and how do we use these lessons to implement them into a greater design on all levels, from the micro to the macro. And I just think that's a huge part of what I've learned to really appreciate is letting people accept these things. But I guess let me just ask you this. How do you personally find the best way to, once people are starting to accept these things and integrate these things, but also realizing the darkness of it, how do you help them stay optimistic? How do you help them not become apathetic? How do you help them say, it's all good, we're going to come away from this stronger? Do you have any approaches or things you find useful?
Me,
yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I do. And I would preface it by saying, first, you have to give them the whole picture, not just one segment that is like, oh my God, there's this oppressive cabal that is out to fuck us all up. Forgive me. But the point is that let's go back to Maslow, because you brought up a really good point, Ben, which was survival and safety, right? And this is why in my book, Woke, I address what is the fundamental fear we have, which is the termination of our existence. And it's interesting. Like, I don't know how I ended up in this position as an anesthesiologist, but we're playing like with some really amazing drugs, honestly. If you really take a look at this, I give someone some medicine and they start breathing some gas and then they go away, and you can literally rip their body open and put it back together, and they wake up and they're they've got some soreness, but they're okay. What is going on with that? And I may be digressing again, but I'm talking about what is, why are we so resistant to looking at the world differently? Is because fundamentally it's like, oh, does that mean I'm going to die? Am I going to be injured? So where do you want me to go with this, Ben and Gordo? Do you want me to keep going with the anesthesia stuff?
Well, how do you help them process? As do you have a certain, is it, meditation? Is it breathing? Is it diet, exercise? What are some pragmatic things that you find that really help people sort of face the inner night of the soul collectively? The dark night of the soul, kind of this moment.
I say,
how do you stay
chapter
optimistic?
5 of the Woke. What's that?
I was going to say, how do you stay optimistic knowing these things that you do?
Well, the first thing is, let's see here. It's again, oh yeah, Coming To. That's the one, man. Yeah. Start reading it right now, Gordo.
For the rest of this podcast, I'm just going to read the book. Okay. Let me just read this quote by Marcus Aurelius. When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love. I think that almost explains it right there. That's such a good quote, because, just telling that to somebody, it probably won't just make people, oh, you know what? I am grateful. Fuck everything I was upset about earlier. It is a form of, there's a way we must integrate the tough parts of reality with the very enjoyable parts of reality. But I think, like, right there, he said breathe. That's the first thing to do, is breathe. It helps you process. When you're doing ayahuasca and you're discovering some of the deepest, darkest aspects of your own behavior and things that you've done, what does everyone say? Breathe. What does a mom say to a child that's having a freak out moment? Breathe, breathe. Like, a lot of the times it's the simplest things that our body was gifted with that allow us to, and like, we have the mechanism within to not reset, but to make it through whatever the problems are, and I think that's also comes down to community and family support, because when I never had a moment when I started experiencing or looking into conspiracy, I never had a moment where I felt hopeless or lost. Not one. I had moments where I was more hopeless and more lost than I sometimes am naturally, but I'm maybe not one of the rare fews. I don't know. I don't know how to actually like quantify this, but I know a lot of people have emailed me saying like, I watched your film, and as much as it's great, I've gone into this rabbit hole. It's affected the way I talk to people. It's affected my family. It's affected so many things about me. And I had to work on how do I approach these people when they're experiencing something vastly different than what I experienced when I got turned on to conspiracy. Conspiracy told me, whoa, the world is so completely different. Yeah. All those things that I thought were just fixed, immovable realities, they're just stories. And I can author my own story, but a lot of people don't have that. So I am also curious, Madhava, you and your wife, who I know we've had this conversation, we had that big group conversation with Robert and with, a whole slew of people, but Foster and Kimberly. And, I heard the stories that everyone shared and the stories that you two shared, having to deal with people who so violently reject anything other than the official narrative. How do you stand your ground, but still be the human you wish to be?
It's a matter of service. That's what brings me the greatest joy, is to have a conversation that brings people to a greater understanding. And we have to understand that some people are not ready to hear these things, and being able to pick and choose where to invest the energy is very important, because you can like blow a week of like negative thinking because you're interacting with the wrong people. Some people are just, they're not there, they really, really are not ready to hear. And, Foster says something very interesting, something like, if are you willing to hear me out? If I can give you a cogent argument for this, can you give me 20 minutes of your time? What are the chances that you would be willing to hear that? Just something like that. He's basically like weeding out the people that you don't really, that are not going to be receptive to anything, even a hopeful message, right? And Foster, if you're listening, I hope you are. I'm sorry if I misquoted you. It's a brilliant quote, but I get what you're saying. Hopefully I conveyed it. So that's, holding your ground. It's like, you don't have to hold your ground. You can just walk away. It's a big world. You know what I'm saying? You don't have to like sit there, no, you're wrong, and don't come any closer. Just, walk away.
I guess I meant hold your ground in what you believe and not feel like you need to hide what you believe is all I meant. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no, to hide what, well, there's too much to lose, honestly, at this point, by not saying what you think,
Yeah.
I mean, it's so obvious. Like the point is like, I feel like we are on a train that's headed for a mountain, right? And we're going, and we're gonna. This is all we should be talking about. I mean, honestly, it's like, do you not see what is going on around you? Can't you see? It's like, and if you just want to sit there and eat your peanuts and read the paper as we're hurtling towards this wall, that's great. But I'm going to go and find someone else and say, hey, do you want to like get to the engineer's compartment so we can steer this the other way? You want to join me? Let's do that. So that makes my life really, really interesting. And I wake up in the morning and I'm like, oh man, like what are the next series of conversations I'm going to have? How do I articulate this point better? What is another way of telling the story? But you read the Marcus Aurelius quote, Ben, which talks about how amazing it is just to be alive. Okay. The flip side to that is, yeah, this is great, but it's going to end. I need to protect this amazing experience of being a human being on this planet, of breathing and listening and hearing and seeing. And it's going to end, and we have to prolong this experience as long as possible. All of a sudden we get derailed into, protection and holding our ground and, outmaneuvering other people for a better experience. And what I wanted to say here, and this is why that chapter is so important, the reason why I am, completely, I feel, I don't want to say, I feel very powerful. And what I believe is that I'm certain that we reincarnate. I mean, there's too much evidence of this. And that's what I explore in that chapter is the evidence for it, and coming at it from an anesthesiologist that's like watching someone go into some place that we have no concept of where they are, and they come back, and it's very, very similar to and it offers a great environment to explore these ideas. And here's what I would suggest to both of you, and you probably know this already, is that, look, I think there's a cabal, I think that, we're being manipulated. We have been for centuries. And the big difference between those guys or women who are pulling the strings and us is that they know that this is just the one chapter in an infinitely long book. And so they're willing to make, sacrifices, and, they've seen the long picture, and they know how to control us because we are so quick to believe that this chapter is the whole thing. Once we can convince the population that when they die, they're done, we can control them like, sheep, if you don't mind me using the language. I don't want to say that word.
Well, I would love to. I would love to dive deep more into your thoughts on reincarnation, because I started off being raised kind of Baptist and had my own sort of journey, was sort of agnostic for a large part of my life, and now I'm in the same boat. But I found a similar belief through a lot of, honestly, I used a very scientific approach to where I was looking at Dr. Ian Stevenson at University of Virginia, Department of Parapsychology. I was looking at people in your field, anesthesiologists, near-death experiencers, and really trying to approach it like an investigative journalist or a lawyer arguing a case, and looking at all these case studies and meta-analysis and going, there's so much overwhelming evidence of people who are pronounced brain dead, and then talking about these out-of-body experiences and being able to recall vivid, specific details when they're supposedly brain dead of people next door, or young kids discussing past lives of World War II pilots, and then knowing specific details of the boat they're on, the plane they're on, and where they're shot down over Japan, and then being able to go to the specific spot in the Japanese Sea and see the crash and meet the family and know specific nuanced details about, oh, he used to do these certain mannerisms, and he knew this certain specific spot where we had these things. And it was just, it's a major breakthrough, but I think a critical component on with great power comes great responsibility, right? And if you know these great sort of powerful, ancient, esoteric sort of truths, you can also use them as a weapon. You can weaponize them too, as you're kind of saying, where you can have a large majority of people to believe a very fear-based paradigm, a very dogmatic, fearful paradigm, because it all goes back to why use fear for anything? It's, it's easier to make people consume more, to be easily more controlled. But hitting on what we first started on in this conversation, death, this idea is the greatest fear for everyone. And this is supposedly the great secret that the psychedelics and the Eleusinian mysteries, it all goes back to this. The Egyptians, weighing your heart compared to a feather, all these ideas of learning. If you can learn the great secret of not being afraid of death and knowing really what you are, and having that experience of basically pseudo death, ego death, and then being able to live the rest of your life knowing that, you're golden. It's awesome. I mean, I worked with a guy when I was in finance who had a serious heart attack. He came back to work the next day. He was walking on cloud nine. He was hugging everyone. He was a new person. He was the most complimentary, nice guy he'd ever been. Yeah. And it was amazing. I was like, he just had a near-death experience. And I was like, he realized something. He found out something. He knows now not to be afraid. It was this, I felt intuitively like, wow, man, he got a glimpse before, the real transition. But please continue. But how did your journey? I'm curious with anesthesiology. That must have been really interesting seeing this so firsthand in the operating room. Was it right away, or how did you come to this conclusion?
Well, Gordon, that was amazing. I'm sorry to say that you were muted the whole time. So
I look down.
Yeah, that was really. Look, Ian Stevenson. That's exactly it. And so here's the thing, guys, is everything you quoted is spot on, right? I mean, we have the proof, it's there. Why aren't we looking at it? And in the operating room, for example, here's what's really amazing about anesthesia. These are some of the oldest medicines that we use, not ether, but anesthetic gases like sevoflurane, isoflurane, all of these gaseous molecules. Now, if I gave you, one of these gases, like sevoflurane, 1 part per 50 in your air mixture, you're going down, and you're gonna be unconscious as long as that mixture is being inhaled and exhaled in your system. There's no way that you're going. There's situations where people are aware, but those are extremely rare and not at the level I'm talking about. Here's what's so fascinating: is we have no idea how it works. No idea. 174 years later, we don't know how these gases work. And mind you, these are extremely simple molecules. These are, hydrocarbons with a few halogens. That means, chloride and fluorine. It's a gas. It's like if you look at a molecule of like an antihypertensive drug, it is huge, a huge number of atoms and molecules. With these gases, they're tiny, they're simple. Why don't we know how they work? And here's the thing, right? This is where we have to use a little bit of wisdom and intuition. Okay, what does it mean to know how something works? This is fascinating because it goes back to the beginning of our conversation. Like, how do we know what we know? When we say we know how something works in medicine, what does that mean? What that means is that we know what the molecule of the medicine looks like, which molecules it interacts with, and what those molecules, now modified by my molecule, what it does. And molecule after molecule, we trace a chain of molecular interaction that results in something molecularly happening. Everything is based on this philosophical aspect called materialism. Basically, matter is everything. Even the awareness of matter is a product of matter interacting with itself. That is the Western model of medicine. It's like, show me the molecules, you identify them, now you know how it works, right? So if we consider the idea of anesthesia, for example, and say, okay, so how is it causing people to go unconscious? And you look at where, the gas is interacting with our body in terms of molecular interactions, it's interacting with a ton of stuff. I mean, it's not one thing. It is affecting everything. It's, affecting lipid membranes and protein synthesis and, DNA and, all of these things. And it's sort of like a ubiquitous interactive field it has with your body. It's like, you mean all of these things are involved in awareness? Really? That can't be. So a more appropriate way, when you say, well, that can't be, there must be one of those things must be the thing, right? So let's assume that there was one thing. And here's what's interesting. And I know that I talk a lot, so anytime you want to say something, please interject. We know from functional MRI studies, PET scans, like where is the blood going when you're aware? Like what is active in your brain? And we have those pathways mapped out, the reticular activating system and other parts of your, frontal cortex, whatever they are, we know what they are. So what does that mean? That's what's aware, those few structures in the brain, that's the awake part, and the rest of us is asleep or unconscious? Okay. So let's assume that awareness resides in those specific compartments of our brain and brain stem. Let's look a little more closely. What's going on in them? When they're active, what makes them active? Well, they're active because you have conduction happening in the neurons that make up those particular components of your brain. Okay, so the neurons now, they're active. The molecules that are in the nerve cells that are now aware. And if you keep boiling it down, you're going to get to smaller and smaller molecules, like, the actual components of the membrane that allow the transmission of electricity down the membrane to make it active. So where then is the part that's aware? So here's the thing, guys, like when you start looking, like we have predetermined what our solution will look like because we're looking for molecules. That's the only thing you're going to find if you're looking for a molecule, right?
Mm-hmm.
How can there be a molecule that represents this multisensorial, experience we're having? It's impossible. Like it doesn't make any sense that we're going to get to the answer, right? Do you follow me here?
Yeah,
I do.
Yeah.
It is interesting. It is interesting as you break it down. I've heard a lot of this actually from, and I think I even remember asking you if you know who Stuart Hamroff is.
No,
Do you
I
know
don't
who's? He's an anesthesiologist. He and Sir Roger Penrose talk about orchestrated. Man, now I'm forgetting it.
They're
but
big on the
basically
microtubules, right? Isn't that his big thing?
So they're looking for aspects of the the brain that resonate with quantum phenomena, and they find that the microtubules, which have tubulin A and tubulin B, and they can kind of change configurations almost instantaneously, that there's something in the microtubules that may be, let's see, like resonant and sympathetic to quantum phenomena. So that so quantum consciousness is what he's talking about, quantum consciousness, and that he believes that consciousness arises at the collapsing of the wave function. And there's a lot of people who contest that, and especially in academia, which that doesn't deter me at all anymore. But I'm also not settled on that. But the interesting thing about that is, I know we talked a little bit, and I don't know how deeply you've gotten into the exploring in the same way psychedelics, like how you were talking, billionths of I guess not a gram, but billions of what is it?
A human body weight.
Okay, billions of a human body weight can be dropped into the body, and it drastically alters consciousness. Same could be said for LSD. It's, in these micrograms, they completely change the human experience, what it is to feel like you're human. Humans who do LSD, a lot of the times they say similar things, like, I felt the boundaries of my body dissolving. I was having thoughts that were not native to me coming through me. I was hearing things in music that I'd heard 1,000 times, like I'd just listened to it for the very first time, and afterwards I can't unhear it. It is very fascinating to understand, like, there's so many different explanations to what is consciousness. What is it that actually makes for consciousness? And I definitely agree and like what you're taking, that is we pre-frame it to be like, well, it has to be something. It has to be like a little particle or a little mechanism or something like that, rather than seeing it from a systems perspective. Is that where you were going with it?
Well, everything you said there is fascinating, and you know more about this, wave function collapsing than I do. But the point here is we're challenging a paradigm, a very important paradigm, which is the material body gives rise to consciousness.
Yeah.
Once you believe that, and then you see an animal die or your grandparent die, then you're like, oh, there's a limitation to my time on this planet because, that body is gone. I see it decomposing. Yeah. So that's where it leads. So that's the paradigm that you must challenge and overturn. Where consciousness comes from, or all of these things that you mentioned are fascinating, but the crucial part of it is to release the paradigm that your awareness is arising because of a functional body. Yeah, it is likely the other way around. That's what the science says.
Well, one of the ways I've thought about approaching this, and my grandfather is in infectious diseases for a long time, and for my whole life we've had very rigorous, long-winded scientific discussions, and he's taught me a lot about the scientific process and formality of testing and double blinds and randomized large sample studies and all this. But when we get into consciousness is when we have the most interesting discussions. And I've always tried to, so I'm kind of of the school of thought of Panpsychism, of sort of, how Annika Harris presents it in her book Consciousness. I highly recommend everyone check out. But basically this idea that everything is consciousness essentially, and that there's levels of consciousness, but matter itself is conscious. So it's, we are all one, it's all consciousness. And you get into specifics, but essentially though, I've always thought about this idea of post-materialism or post sort of the Newtonian Einstein equations, that it's not that we have to necessarily get rid of those, and this is just my theory and opinion, is we don't have to say, okay, Newtonian physics and Einstein's laws of gravitation don't work and don't still have merit in pragmatics for, you know, all the things we currently use them for. It's just we need to evolve to the final sort of stage of truly understanding the most subatomic proto level of all of this stuff. And there's levels to this. Dr. John Hagelin has been somebody who I really appreciated a lot of his work breaking it down when you understand it, that there's levels to it. But do you think that it's possible for scientists to appreciate the current schools of thought that they were taught, but then evolve and integrate this new understanding of consciousness, of the most sort of proto layer of it? Because it's going to clearly cause extreme cognitive dissonance. If you talk to a standard reductionist, materialist scientist, and I mean, TED Talks, you know, they got rid of certain Graham Hancock speeches for even bringing these things up. You know, this is a big no-no currently in the world of science. How do you find is the best way to bridge them, as, you know, assuming we find and continue to have more and more evidence that points to this new understanding, sort of this Copernicus moment? Do you think it's just having the conversation? Do you think it's just going to have to be hardcore empirical evidence that does it? How do you see that transition occurring? And what have you kind of already experienced with your own sort of going, you know, you've kind of gone through both worlds, it seems like, a little bit.
Yeah, that's a great question, Gordo. It's almost identical to the question of how do you get a structural engineer to see Building 7? I don't know, you know?
Right.
Some people see it and some people don't. And, you know, my personal feeling about this is I think it's a worthy pursuit of science to go after the kinds of things that you just brought up there. You know, where does it lie? Let's keep exploring.
Right.
But, you know, if we spend the next set of generations or the rest of your life exploring these interesting ideas with the fear of dying, then you've like totally, marred this whole amazing life that Marcus Aurelius is talking about. You know, so like I am, you know, I've spent a lot of time in school, and those things are fascinating to me, but they don't interest me. I'm more interested in bringing a person to challenge the paradigm so that he can live his life, or she can live their lives happily and without fear.
Right.
Without making that transition as a person and as a species, we are stuck. We're going to, like, if you believe that when you're dead, you're gone forever, you see everything in absolute terms, number one. Number two, it would be absurd, honestly, to share. I mean, we like to share because it feels good, but in the end, it's like, no, it's for me. If I have to give this up, I'm not going to do it. So we're always outmaneuvering ourselves for a little more because we believe time is limited, because we believe resources are limited. So unless we overturn this, you know, in a collective scale, you know, we're just going to be going in circles. Yeah, we're going to have, you know, better theories about where consciousness, like, what if, you know, CNN comes up tomorrow and says, you know, we've got this new theory for consciousness. It's, you know, not materially based. It is absolutely, you know, it's coming from the collapse of the wave function or microtubules or everything you mentioned. What difference does it make? See, this is the difference between believing and knowing.
Yeah, no, I feel what you're saying. Like, you know, an inner knowing is a platform by which something authentic within you arises. And believing, I think that beliefs are valuable in the sense that so are steps, right? The step isn't a destination. It's a means by which we ascend to a different level of the house or whatever it is, you know. But a lot of the times we get stuck on a certain step, on a certain belief, when it no longer serves us. A step serves us when it's right above us.
Yeah.
Right. And you step up onto it. When you've gotten past it, it no longer serves us. So beliefs are valuable in that respect. And a knowing, what it feels like to me is a knowing is I know what I was put here to do. And it's something I don't even care to try and get other people to believe. I just express it. I express it because that's my my meanness. That's the way I am. And so I guess what I'm liking about what you're saying is, and especially when you said, how do you get an engineer, a structural engineer, or whatever, to see Building 7 in a different way? The first thing that came to my mind was something that Gordo and I were talking about earlier. He sent me a couple videos that came from Timcast IRL, and it was Charlie Kirk from Turning Point USA and Vosh. And these are people on different sides of the political divide. And they were talking about things like critical race theory, and they were talking about vaccines. And what I noticed was there's two elements to this. It was kind of perplexing for me because at first I went into it and I started hearing which side each of these individuals held, what kind of beliefs they held about how things should be carried out, when it comes to state mandates and yada, yada, it goes on and on. But I noticed that one thing that had Vosh, the self-proclaimed libertarian socialist, had he had some points that were closer to what I've landed on as far as what I believe would be a good, way forward. Like, he'd be my favorite person in the world right now. He spoke so well. We were talking about logical fallacies and how often you see logical fallacies through political campaigns and, presidency debates all over mainstream media. And what was interesting was, like, I could have gotten swung by Vosh, even though I didn't agree with the things he was saying. I agreed with some of them, I should say. I didn't agree with a couple of them. But the other guy who was saying things that I appreciated more, I couldn't stand the way that he talked, the way that he interrupted, the faces that he would give, the kind of cockiness, the arrogance, and the less than smooth way that he went about the debate. And so the reason why I'm bringing that up is because I also noticed that how do you get somebody to see something differently is when I get people telling me, it's just like, yeah, I get into a conversation with somebody and then their eyes glaze over and they end up doing a lot of this, like, and I'm like, okay, that's when you're just blasting them with stuff that either they don't know the exact words so clearly that it's hard for them to keep up, or they're just like, this is not the party I wanted to go to. I wanted to hang out with my friends and see how they were doing. And now all of a sudden I'm talking about, 9/11 and stuff that I didn't care to get into today. So what is interesting about this is when we're talking about knowing and believing and biases that keep us from seeing reality potentially in a slightly different way, is a lot of it is filtered through people. And a lot of it is nuanced, where I know that there have been people that have turned their mind off to a topic just because it was David Icke who said it. I could have read the quote and been like, yo, this is what some wise guy says about consciousness. And they're like, oh man, that hit me so deep. And I'm like, yeah, it was David Icke. And they'd be like, the reptilian guy? And then they'll just like, I hate that. Now I'm not into what you just said. Yeah. And so, like, I know that's a little bit hyperbolic, but the bottom line behind that is I also believe that it's not my job to get somebody to believe something or to change who they are in any way. So it's kind of like the Tao. I'm not here to ensure that other people, after this podcast and after every Waking Infinity news, are a little bit closer to reality. What I've noticed that the best thing I can do is see the beauty in the way things are, and then allow that beauty to express itself through me, because then I'm not pointing so many fingers at people who think differently. I'm actually elucidating and highlighting what I find beautiful about them and it's also perfectly okay that I completely disagree for X, Y, and Z reasons. So that has helped people look past a certain kind of, like, I'm not eye rolling like, oh my God, this freaking idiot talking about blah, 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 because then that only plays into the people who agree with what I'm saying and who like that kind of eye rolling, very immature way of discourse. So, like, I guess what I'm saying is, like, when we're getting to the knowing and when we're getting to the, the believing, What have you mentioned before, like how Foster kind of has like, here's how I weed out the people who just are probably not going to listen from the get-go. How do you bring this up in conversation? Do you bring it up in conversation? You know, like how do you vet what kind of a person you're talking to, where you could even bring something like this up?
Well, there aren't a whole lot of people out there that are on the fence about some of these things, you know.
Yeah.
That's where we are right now, and they don't look. It's a reasonable question, but it's been a long time since I've met someone who says to me, you know, I know you're doing a lot of stuff with the vaccine research. You know, can you tell me what you found, and why do you believe what you believe? I'm willing to hear. That almost never happens anymore, you know. And what's really interesting, and I don't want to put that glazed look on your eyes, Ben, when I'm bringing up 9/11 again. But, you know, when I saw Building 7 and I did all this stuff, I mean, I called up NPR and, you know, wrote them letters. And I said, hey, you know, I'm a big contributor. And can I talk to a producer about, you know, coming out with the truth about 9/11? Like, I really thought that, you know, someone would listen to me and give me a platform. And I was so completely naive because I didn't know, you know, that people were so stuck in their ways of thinking about things. So, but to answer your question, and it's a really good question, because those moments are precious, right? When you're with someone who's like truly curious. And here's a question for both of you. You know, below, like, what is the soil for that kind of conversation, you know, for that kind of plant to grow? And I would suggest that it has to do with curiosity, right? Mm-hmm. Like that guy that you mentioned, you know, was so into the quote, and then he finds out it's from David Icke, and then he throws the whole thing away. It's like, what happened to your curiosity, you know, about like where that takes you? Like, why does that, you know, how do you invoke or allow curiosity to flourish in another human being? I really want to know what your opinion is.
Wait, I'm sorry. Ask that one more time.
You can. How do you make someone more curious, or is it?
How do you lead the horse to water? Right. I mean, I always say you can only lead a horse to water, but you can make that water look really, really quenching.
Mm-hmm. Right. You could race the horse around the lake a bunch of times.
You get the horse really tired, so it's.
And so I wanna answer that real quick, you know, because what I love about what you said, it wasn't based on any other outcome than causing a little bit more curiosity in them. That's number one, which is really important, because when I'm giving my thoughts about what's going on in the world, I'm very clear to say it may not benefit you to believe the same things that I believe. So very clear about that. I love that we can take a look at what I like doing is showing people how to watch documentaries and how to read books that are either above our pay grade or outside of our comfort zone in terms of what it will cause us to, you know, potentially believe by the end of it. That we should do it and be more curious about our inner process of what inside me is inspired to look deeper, and what inside me is just like, meh, and what inside me is like, no, I refuse to look, because all those have very valid energies behind them that we should investigate. So what I love about, you know, causing for people to be a bit more curious, how I go about that is I neutralize myself in the sense of I try and do so much justice to the side that I'm about to deconstruct to show that the other side, and I don't always do this perfectly, but this is my intent at least. If I have, well, you know, and I also try and say there isn't just a yes or no to any of these things, but if there's a debate, and this is what a lot of people believe, I try and show, like, here's how I understand it, and here's why I appreciate it. And I'm getting better at that. Here's why I appreciate it. However, here's some of the holes in it. Before I even get over here, here are some of the holes in what I see over here, because in order to believe X, Y, and Z, you have to come to the premeditated belief that XA, YA and BA are true. And then that has to be, you have to presuppose all these other things. And so what I do is to create a little bit more curiosity, is to show the process of questioning your own mental state without doing the Tucker Carlson. And I only say Tucker Carlson because he's the most popular news anchor out there. Every single news anchor I've met that is not of the independent ilk is exactly like this. They believe what they're saying has a factual truth to it that cannot be seen any other way, and all of their facial expressions and body language comes from, this is an authoritative view. There's only one way you can see this, and if you don't, it's really disgusting. And they give all these faces that make you feel dumb. Yes, they make you feel dumb with their facial expressions and the little head tilts. Like the very first time I saw ayahuasca being talked about on the news, there was a woman, an Australian woman, being like, tons of people are flocking to Peru to, check out this jungle brew's supposedly magical properties. And there was this big head tilt with this magical properties. And that to me is just like, if you could have said that a bit more intelligently, then you can actually ignite curiosity inside people. So to answer your question, Madhava, how I do that, how I attempt to do that, is to show I actually do see the relevance and how intelligent people can arrive at a completely opposite belief than my own. However, here's how I deconstruct it, and here's where I've landed. But don't land over here. Just go through this process on your own, and then tell me where you land, because maybe you land somewhere that's even more, thoroughly thought through than myself. So it's more about the process of discernment and, sharpening that blade of discernment than it is, do you believe this or do you believe that? Do you see what I mean?
I do completely. And those are all really good points. And the distinction I was trying to make here is that, you talked about two different people at a party that you're talking to someone. There was the person that whose eyes glazed over.
Yeah.
Right. And then there was a person that was like, that's not what I came here for. Right. It's the person that did not want to hear a dissenting opinion.
Right.
And then the person who just didn't give a shit.
Right.
Right. And I guess where I'm trying to go with this is that, what you just said there is brilliant and very effective for the person that's, I don't want to listen to that, right? Because, they don't want to be told that they're wrong, and you have to show them that there's uncertainty on my side, but it's the person whose eyes glazed over is like, I just don't want to, I don't care. I don't care that the world's going to end. I don't care about 9/11. I don't care about, vaccine safety. I don't care. Yeah. Where, how do you get, we know, honestly, I think this is the engine that drives us to become better human beings, is not just the need for pleasure, but curiosity. And I would say that for me, I think it's innate. There's some people that are just curious. And if there was anything that may play a role in how curious someone is, it's about how safe they feel.
True.
I think, there could be an inherent sort of level of curiosity that's pretty high, but if they're insecure or, they feel threatened, that curiosity goes way down. It's I don't know.
Well, it's something I've found too, when you experience people who have extreme apathy and are extremely apathetic or nihilistic, where, why should I care whether it's, whatever subject, for instance, something that I come across this sometimes is with UAPs. I think a critical thing that I've taken away from both of you is obviously set and setting. Being in the right mindset, the way you present these ideas with your emotional intelligence, with your words, with your patience, with your breathing, with how you're coming across. And then it's like doing a psychedelic, set and setting. And then are you in the right setting? Is this the right time and place to be talking to this person? And is this person ready? And if they are somebody who's ready or open-minded but apathetic, I've tended to find that the best way to have some people try to get a little bit more, become more curious when they're apathetic is showing how they do have a vested interest, showing how it does affect them to some degree. Because whenever I bring up UAPs and otherworldly things, people go, "Oh, that's kind of weird and out there," and like, but like, who cares, dude? Why does it affect me? Like, I got more important things tomorrow to deal with than an alien craft landing on the White House. And I said, okay, valid, true. But let me, if you're open to it, can I explain to you why this will actually affect you directly? And this will affect almost all elements of life. And Ben and I did a whole series on this, and there's a big part of it. But it's when you're apathetic, a key thing is making you feel like you have a part to play. You have skin in the game. And it's whether it's just a political process or anything. You don't have to necessarily be a fan of it or anything, but you are making a choice by being apathetic. That is also a choice in itself of saying, I don't want to be involved and participate. That's fine. You're entitled to that. George Carlin is the famous comedian for this. He loved just commentating and making fun of the madness, and he did it beautifully, and I love him for playing that role. And some people, that's cool if you want to play that role, but I'll push back on them when they say, like, I don't have, why does it affect me? I say it does affect you. Now, you can choose not to care and know it affects you, but I think it definitely does affect you. So that's just my 2 cents on when you deal with apathetic ideologies.
Yeah, and so I guess because there's a question from the audience about ceremonies. I just kind of want to say on that, you're definitely right. There are the people who their eyes glaze over and they just do not care to engage. And I also find that, I don't mean to put this in terms to make it sound volatile, but in the Revolutionary War, the statistics show that less than 4% of the population actually involved themselves in the Revolutionary War itself. Everybody else was just minding their own business. They were just on their property, not getting involved. Because if you look at the amount of land that actual battles were taking place on, it's a small fraction as well of the entire land mass. So the bottom line is I think when it comes to the Tao, which I try not to follow religiously, but when I look at the Tao invites us to see the beauty inherent in what is before we try to change it because of preference. And so there are just some people that they're not willing to go there, and maybe they haven't gone through enough incarnations, and it's not their time. It's not their lifetime even. But what I did want to ask, because I'm curious, we haven't really talked about this yet, Madhava. Jeffrey Cummings, first he says up above here, he's commenting a lot on this podcast. He's a repeat audience member. He said, curiosity created the cool cat. And then he says, and sacred song and dance always open the gates. And so like, he says, could you ask Madhava about any ceremonies he would suggest? And then he said neo-shamanism. And I said, what do you mean by new shamanism? And he said, oh, Paul Chek mentioned it last week. And Paul Chek mentioned neo-shamanism. And I guess to make that more of a succinct question is, do you engage in ceremony, whether it be psychedelic or whether it be, any kind of ceremony? Do you involve yourself in ceremony? I know this is kind of a deviation from what we were talking about, but I have a way that we can tie it back in as well.
Well, as a licensed and practicing physician, I have attested that I don't do controlled substances.
Okay.
And I believe that ceremony is right in front of us. It depends on how you want to approach the next moment. And, I find the cushion ceremonious. I find cooking ceremonious. It all depends on where you want to place your attention. That being said, I think there's something to be said, I'm told, about some of these medicines and ceremony. That's as far as I'll go on that.
No, I really appreciate what you say there because, I think I was just talking to this guy, Josh Trent. He's Wellness Force, friends with the Aubrey Marcus crew. And anyway, he was talking yesterday about how, what he really likes to guide people through is breath work. You can augment your consciousness, but in a sense, like as soon as you stop breathing heavy or doing your breath practice, you start immediately returning to baseline, as opposed to a psychedelic where, I've had it and I've even seen it where people go into a really dark space and it's hours before they come out of it. And hours in that kind of a space is like an eternity. It's scary. So I like what you say there. I really do appreciate it, because the thing about ceremony, you're definitely right. How do we approach the moment that is right here and in front of us? So many people think like, well, cooking, it's just that, it's that obnoxious thing that we have to do before we get to eating the food and getting the reward. Having to go to the bathroom, man, such a bother, because it interrupts things that I would prefer to be doing. And I think, again, we're coming back to loving what is and loving even the patterns of what is. And that's even appreciating our addictions, appreciating the things that we feel afflicted by and appreciating them in the right way, not as in like, well, I guess I just have to find a way to like my afflictions and not ask them to go away. But before asking them to go away, actually sitting with it and feeling and sensing it out. Why is it here? I have a lot of people who they deal with chronic back pain or some kind of chronic pain, and their first go-to thing is like, how do I get it to go away? And I ask, have you sat with it and actually asked it, like, what are you here representing? Why are you here? What is this from? And maybe you don't get an answer, but part of that is really just sitting in the sensation and the feeling of that thing that is so uncomfortable that we wish to just end it without asking any questions, without knowing why it's there. So I appreciate when you're saying that ceremony is, how do you engage with the moment? It's really important to understand that. And I think with the remaining time that we have here, I don't know. You tell me, Madhava, like, did you want to talk about, because the very last thing I saw from you was it was a podcast where it was called, it was all about pandemic. And it was a conversation about, I think it was Judy Mikovits. It was part 3 of this podcast. You probably remember which one I'm talking about. It was a guy with a shaved head. Do you know who I'm talking of?
Yes, I mean, you're referring to Mickey Willis's first movie, Plandemic, that came out at the beginning of the pandemic. And that was one of these movies, I don't know where you are on this. I assume that we're pretty well aligned as to what's going on right now. But that movie came out about a year ago, or maybe a little bit, no, longer than that. It was March or April. Anyway, I wanted to dissect what the arguments were that Judy was making, and just digging into the research behind what she was saying. And I don't look. I think she's a really good person, and I don't think she's the best spokesperson for the science. I think she's not the most credible person, but I believe she's being honest with what's going on. But in any case, this is an enormous situation we're in right now, and we're not being told the truth. I mean, that's what I've been devoting my time to almost exclusively for the last year, is to dig through the studies, dig through the science, explain things in ways where people will catch on to the fact that we're not being told the truth, just like in 9/11.
Yeah. What I liked about that was, in that interview, you were actually citing something about efficacy studies of even the flu shot. Like you didn't even get into the new, COVID-19 vaccines, but just regular coronaviruses, which that's what would make up the flu, right?
Well, it's usually called influenza viruses, with a different, but they make, you get a cold from a coronavirus, and you can get something that feels like a cold from a flu virus. But these are respiratory borne viruses, yes, and they're difficult to vaccinate against. But go ahead.
So, I mean, I want to make a statement and then ask a question. Like the statement I really like about it is that you were citing how numbers can be shared that could be looked at differently, and you were saying that the effectiveness of the influenza vaccine, they're stated to be in the 60 percentile, the 60 to 70 percentile effectiveness. And you said, well, it was something, and please correct me if I speak erroneously to what you were talking about, but you said it's about a 6% chance that you will get the flu in general, with or without the vaccine, about 6% chance. And then when you get the flu shot, it lowers it from 6% to 2%, something along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, you're referring to something that's very important, which is called absolute risk versus relative risk reduction. Okay. And this is an important part because, we hear numbers like, it's 80% effective, it's 60% effective. And we just accept that a big number is good and let's get the jab, right? And what you're referring to there is in an average flu season, there's an 8% chance you're going to get the flu. And if you're taking a vaccine for the flu that's 60% effective in reducing relative risk, that means that your risk of getting the flu, if you get a shot, is about 3.2%. Basically, I'm multiplying 40% times 8 is 3.2%. So that's great. It's lower. That's great. But what is the actual, absolute risk reduction? Well, if I got the shot, it's 3.2% of getting the flu. If I don't get the shot, it's 8. So the difference is what? 4.8%. 4.8. But you go around saying, you want the flu shot. It reduces your absolute risk of getting the flu by 4.8%. People will be like, I don't care. 4.8%. Why would I get, the flu vaccine if I'm going to be ill? I might get sick afterwards. So that's one way that numbers here we're not distorting anything, right? Because it's true. It's, and here's the thing about the flu vaccine is that the very best we've ever done is about 60 to 70% efficacy in reducing relative risk. On average, it's around 50, and there are years where it's like 12%, which is basically nothing. It doesn't do anything, honestly, with an absolute risk that's only 8%. What scares me, and what I'm railing against, and I'm trying to put content out there that explains this, is we have the CDC and Anthony Fauci and Rochelle Walensky coming out just a month ago saying 99% of those dying are the unvaccinated. Have you heard this?
I have, and I've even heard. I think I don't want to just like rattle off something that I heard, but I did hear something from Biden or the administration. I just spoke about this, where he was saying the real pandemic is the unvaccinated. So I'm going to see if I can find that direct quote, because I definitely don't want to get that wrong.
No, I mean,
but I have heard that coming as an argument.
It's coming from all over the place, Ben. It's coming from the White House. It's coming from Fauci. It's coming from Walensky. It's coming from different mainstream media platforms, and this is where it's very important to point out why I, as a physician, regard that statement as grossly disingenuous. Why should I suspect it to begin with? Most people don't suspect it because it's coming from the CDC or it's coming from the NIAID. That's Fauci's organization. The reason why I look at that statement and say, what are you talking about? How could that possibly be reality? You need to know, you have to have some background, right? So if you go back and look at the Pfizer study, they claim look at that. They claimed after 5 or 6 weeks of observation, they claimed a 95% efficacy in preventing COVID. What that means is that they watched people get sick in their period, and they checked to see how many people got the vaccine, how many people got the placebo, and there were 20 times more people who got the placebo than got the vaccine. That's how they say, it's 95% effective. Right away, I was dumbfounded because that is amazing, given what we know about flu vaccines. That's huge. So here's where we get lost, because, it was 95% effective, but now they're saying 99% of the people who are getting sick are unvaccinated. What's the difference there? Well, when we say something is 95% effective, that means there's 20 times more people getting sick who are unvaccinated, because the ratio of 95% to 5% is about 20 to 1. You follow that?
Yeah, yeah.
However, when we say it's 99% of people are of the ones getting sick are unvaccinated, we're saying the ratio now is 99 to 1. That is a factor of 5 over an already difficult to accept vaccine efficacy, because 95% is amazing. 99% is ridiculously good. It actually cannot be. Like, for me, it's like, okay, how did they get that? And, I did a series of interviews with Joe Martino on collective evolution and The Pulse. That's my home platform, where I try to explain the science to people.
There are buddies,
and,
yeah.
Yeah. Joe. He thinks a lot of you. Thanks, you're great. I just talked to him today. And what's astonishing to me is that why aren't more physicians speaking up about this? How could a vaccine, because when they say that 99% of the people who are getting sick are unvaccinated, they're saying that, you have a 99 times more chance of getting sick if you're unvaccinated. That's what that number means. Yeah, put those up. Those are good. Go there, everybody. Want to know something, how to look at it objectively. That is an outrageous claim. And this is why I put out this kind of content, is I go and I extract the information from the CDC databases and from the state departments of health, and demonstrate that there's just absolutely no way that could be. It can't. And the way they say it, okay, this is where the distortion comes, right? ABC says something like 99%, that factoid. And then they quote a statement from a Department of Health from a state. And then you go to that particular citation, and they don't give you any data, but they say, oh, at the end of it, the CDC says that 99% of the people who are dying are unvaccinated. So you have the circular, like, he says that person says this. But if you'd actually download the data from the CDC databases, which I do on a regular basis, you know what's really fascinating is that they do not tell you what the vaccination status is of the people who are perishing or getting sick. They don't tell us. They'll tell you everything else, but they won't tell you who is vaccinated and who is unvaccinated, okay? But what they do know, tell us, is how many people are dying in every jurisdiction on a weekly basis. And we both know that they keep meticulous records of who is vaccinated and who isn't, but they're not putting it together, right? Why is this? I don't know. But because they're not putting it together, they can make these claims. Because if you go and look at the data from some of these departments of health, state departments of health, what they really are saying is, like, if you look at Colorado, 96% of the people who are dying are unvaccinated. And then you go beyond the headline, and it says, this was in a period between January 1st and June 30th. What's wrong with this? Right. What's wrong with the statement? Right. Here's the problem. In January, guess how many people were vaccinated fully? 0.
Wow.
The vaccines came out December 14th. It takes 4 weeks to become fully vaccinated. Guess, when were deaths the highest? January, February. So because they use that time window and they're not correcting for the numbers at risk, which is sort of the denominator in all of this, and I'm sorry I'm going into the math too much, but they can make that statement, which is factually true. If you actually look at the people who are dying, 96% of them would be unvaccinated, but there was no vaccinated people around back then.
Right. So it wasn't, I just want to clarify this just in case anybody in the audience didn't hear it the way that I heard it. What you're saying is they're making it sound like the unvaccinated are by choice, but they take from a sample when there was no choice. There were no vaccines there. So it's, I guess what I'm hearing is this is the way it seems like news stations, when they need to have the conclusion before the story comes out, when you have to arrive at a specific conclusion, so you have to search for the type of data that you can make an article out of to arrive at what the preordained agenda is, and I think all media has this, a preordained agenda, then the only way that you can show some numbers like 96% of people in Colorado who died during this period were the unvaccinated, without actually expressing the issue with that, it's like it's lying without lying. Like I've said this before, where an article on the cover, I've seen this before. It said Michael Jackson and Faye Dunaway get married. Factually true statement, but very, very misleading, because they didn't marry one another. They married different people. So this headline is causing the headline, which, I mean, I don't know what the statistics are, but I guarantee most people, they read the headline, that's their first impression, that's what sticks in them the most. Some people read meticulously through it and then might be like, oh yes, that balances out what I thought it was, but there's still something with that first impression. But most people, they read the headline and they're like, I fucking knew it, and then they scroll through and they may even miss that part of it or not piece it together because they're not looking for anything other than what their emotions are telling them to believe at the moment. So they may not see what you saw in that, which is nobody was vaccinated at the beginning of this period that they took from. So their sample was off.
Yes. So, and here's the thing: is like, why would anyone, question it the way I question it? Because most people regard what they're told as being true, and you just happen to have some experience in medicine and statistics with vaccines, and when they make that claim, I'm like, how is that possible? That's impossible. And that's sort of the impetus to look further. But what you said there, Ben, was really interesting, right? Because the reason why I bring this up is we have this culture that says you must trust the science. I trust the science. You see it on road signs in Massachusetts, like when you're driving down the pike, it's get vaccinated, trust the science, all this stuff about trusting the science. Really? Do you think science is what the New York Times headline says the science says? Is that what you think science is? Like, how many people, like you just said, will read no further than the headline? Oh, it's in the Times. It's Washington Post. It says that's the science. It's because it came from that platform. How many people actually read the whole article? This is an article that talks about new CDC studies shows this, or this came out of JAMA. So they read the article, but do they go to the article that the New York Times cited and read that? Very few do that, right?
Yeah.
And of the few that actually go and read the JAMA article, that's the Journal of American Medical Association, or British Medical Journal, wherever it is, of the people that read the actual publication, how many of those have the capacity to critique it? How many people, go and actually read the whole study and read where the authors of the study themselves acknowledge the uncertainty in their conclusions? How many people have the ability to challenge the methodology that were used? How many people can find where the uncertainty is in the statistical analysis? Almost none. But any reasonable, scientific publication, all of the uncertainty is laid out there for you if you're willing to read it. Do you think that gets to the headline of the New York Times? No, never. So when we say, oh, you got to trust the science, please, unless you're a scientist that knows how to actually analyze this data, you're not trusting the science. You're trusting what the New York Times is telling you the science says. And so this is how, everything is getting distorted, because these people are so certain that they're right because they're trusting the science, like their neighbor Joe down the street is trusting the science. And, he knows someone that, has a friend who's a scientist, and that's what the scientist says. We're trusting people and media platforms. And how many, honestly, come on, people, like how many ads from pharmaceutical industries are on these platforms? You don't think that there's some complicity there in not giving you a balanced view, really? I mean, this is it's really, really, I see this happen, and the reason why I'm so vociferous about this is that I feel like I understand completely when the average person says, I don't know what to believe. I don't. I get it. I understand. I have complete compassion for you, and I understand that what predicament you're in. It is the people, it's my own colleagues that I have very little tolerance for.
Right.
You know, we took an oath, we all did, to do no harm, and we've become and forgive me, like for all my colleagues out there, like I know you're working hard, you know, and I know that you want to do the right thing. I am not at all saying that you guys are all, you know, self-serving jerks. We're all trying, but we were trained, at least I was, in how to act, how to challenge what you're being told, you know, and that I know that we're all so busy and we're all trying to do the right thing and, you know, dealing with a pandemic and going to work every day and not knowing whether you're going to contract the disease or not having enough protective equipment was horrible. I get it. But it's our responsibility to challenge what we're being told before we follow what we're being told.
Yeah.
And I, you know, look, I haven't made a lot of friends, you know, in my community by saying things like this. But, you know, I invite your audience to go and check out some of the content that I put forth, some really, really strong stuff. And it's meant to explain to the average person how to figure out what you're being told. And thank you, Gordo, for putting those up. There's other ones that go into the spike protein, the toxicity there. And I just put out one today, which is really, really interesting because Pfizer has released interim data, you know, after 6 months of observation. And unless you know how to parse through it, you're going to miss it. And there's some nuggets in there that I think we all should consider. And please, you know, I'm making this as a public. I know I don't want you to get banned or anything, but don't vaccinate your kids yet. At least wait till the studies are done, please.
Yeah. No, thank you for saying that, and thank you for being candid about it. Because bottom line is, you know, we on this show we try to keep it as moderate as possible while not ignoring, you know, elephants in the room. You know, so there's no need for us to. I see the style of argument that people get into when we're talking about vaccines, when we're talking about COVID, when we're talking about conspiracies, about any of these things. It's hard not to keep an even keel, but it's very important to have examples of keeping an even keel. And you know, for me, when you say like at least wait, you know, for proper studies to be done before vaccinating children. It's also a statement that's coming from take a look at the, as you were saying, the difference between the absolute and the relative risk. Take a look at the actual risk that, you know, children have before we go to some measure. And I'm not going to say it's extreme. You know, like I've had to do my own research on the difference between vaccines today and vaccines back in the day. I got tons of vaccines when I was in the military, typhoid, yellow fever. I almost got anthrax. I got, you know, I remember I would sit there for like 40 minutes while they would pull out 7 different needles, right? Yeah. You know, and so, but the bottom line is like, don't worry about the, you know, us talking about this on YouTube, because the bottom line is my allegiance here really is to not try to get kicked off YouTube, but to at least say what I know people are going to be thinking in themselves if they're skeptical. And I want to cover that base in some way. So I really appreciate the way you put that forward. I also have to mention, I really like the way you look at the data. Gordo, thank you for pulling up that, you know, that was showing the 99% about the vaccines, that slide. There's also Destiny Rocks in the comments, I guess, found me through the Tim Pool podcast and said, you know, thank you for allowing me to open my mind without fear. Thank you for your enlightening guests. And I'm so thankful you were on Tim Pool's show. But Destiny Rock said, where is it? Right above that. Subscribe to Dr. Setty's exceptional, subscribe to Dr. Setty, exceptional mind. So I want to give you the opportunity to tell the audience, because it seems like everybody in here was also saying like, dude, you gotta keep this conversation going, you know, make sure this lives forever on YouTube. Please tell the audience how they can find you, how they can get deeper into the content that you're bringing forward, because I and the audience is obviously seeing that, you know, this is the kind of discourse that we want to accept into our headspace, because a lot of the discourse out there is so negative. If you watch the news, somebody else also said, you know what I miss on mainstream media and TV is scientific debates, when scientists from both sides, and I guess what, Marlon Terdue is saying there is, when people are actually having a debate, but allowing the other to fully ask a question, hearing it correctly, like the Buddha said, first you need right sight, then you need right understanding, then and only then can right action come about. If you're not letting somebody finish their question, oh, I know exactly where you're going with this, and I'm going to tear your argument down. It's two things. For one, maybe you don't know exactly what that person's talking about. And for two, you're giving a bad example of how discourse should be done. And we have discourse in our own mind. I remember, back in the day, when I started realizing how I flip-flop on ideas where I'm on the fence, is I have a debate in my own head. And so we need better examples of that. I really think you are a good example of how to even just look at the data, because there's a lot of people who are saying the data is clear, but two people can say the data is clear, and what they say is completely polar opposite to one another. So again, that's a long-winded way of saying, please tell people how they can find you in your content.
It's very kind of you guys for allowing me to share that stuff. And I'm going to be honest with you. Like, I'm new to all this. I have a YouTube channel, but I don't really put things on there. Ben, you found that that the series of videos I did on pandemic. Most of my content is on the Collective Evolution platform, which I highly respect, and I really invite all of your listeners to go check it out. The owner of that platform is Joe Martino. That right there is my own webpage where I introduced the book Woke. But we're doing some really great things over there. And Joe speaks highly of you and what you're doing. And that's where you can find me. I'm every week he's given me an opportunity to put together some content that's hitting on stuff that's very important, what's going on right now, especially around medicine. And hopefully we'll do something on 9/11 in a couple of weeks. But yes, go to the Pulse, go to Collective Evolution. And I came out with a couple of really, really, I think, hard-hitting articles on Medium in the last couple of months, where I try to explain the real reasons why people are vaccine hesitant. And it's not what the other side says at all, and for those of you who have some questions about how to talk to your friends about this, and how do you get out of a difficult situation at a party where people are asking you about your vaccine status, I invite you to share this article. One is called How to Get to 70%, Mr. President. And another one is called Waking Up to Wuhan, Why This Doctor No Longer Trusts the CDC. They're pretty powerful. And that's I put this stuff up. That's a good one right there. Good job, Gordo. I put these things out there because I want people to share it, because nobody, or very few people, are articulating cogently why we need to pause at this moment in this time right now. Because anybody who expresses a vaccine cautionary posture gets attacked as a anti-science, libertarian QAnon Trump supporter that swallows, Clorox or something like that. But look, I appreciate the fact that you're letting me speak about this, men, because this is very important to me. This is why I'm here. This has lent so much more importance about my medical training. I love taking care of people, but I realize now why I'm here. It's to write as a physician and use what authority I have to change people's minds and to instill a sense of curiosity. Like, go look a little harder, and don't be, just like you said, just because David Icke says it doesn't mean it's wrong. If Trump says the moon is not made of cheese, does that mean to you that it's made of cheese? I mean, let's be real here, you know?
Yeah.
Ideas and thoughts stand on their own. It doesn't matter who speaks them.
Yeah, thank you for that. No, I appreciate it, and I think this was such a valuable conversation to have. Everybody, I mean, like, man, I could keep just asking you questions through here. I think like maybe we should, in due time, come back and talk about like some specific topics as they come up. But the audience really appreciated just the manner of discourse that we had, the topics that we covered, and it helps me. It does. Having this podcast is such a pleasure. It really is. Like getting to sit in these conversations. It's so rich, and we get to get right down to the point, and then I get to in real time see what the audience is taking from it. I think this is something we can glean from the new world that we're living in. Is, you know, of course, I would like to have technology that's not, you know, non-ionizing radiation pumping, you know, everywhere, and it's hard to get away from it. You always have to have your phone on you. Now we're moving into, you know, barcoding everything, and your phone's going to help you get into places. And, you know, it's such a tough world that we live in, but it is also, as the Tao also says, is that we see a lot more of what it is that we are looking for, whether that be the negative side or the positive side. Now, that doesn't mean reality is changing around that, but it definitely means that our experience forms to those types of things that we are looking at most often. And we know this, that, you know, like if you're a mortician as opposed to a landscaper, it's just naturally there's going to be a difference in the way that in being in this environment over time affects you versus being in that other environment affects you over time. So what I appreciate about this, and I hope the audience really sees this, is this is where you go. Not just my podcast, there's tons of other ones out there, but this is where you go if you want to see the world for what it is, but also understand that there are very real ways, no matter what you've done, if you've gotten the vaccine, if you haven't gotten the vaccine, if you believe this or if you believe that, it doesn't really, like, all those things definitely make a difference, but the real big push that we're trying to highlight here is that no matter what, no matter who you are, no matter what side of any debate you stand on, there's always goodness that you can bring into the world, your own life, your own core inner circle. And really, we complicate things so much and feel like, you know, we put such a standard that we have to know the truth and we have to be completely well read. And if we get one fact wrong, then man, we got to smack our heads and be like, so stupid. We put ourselves through more stress than we really need to. And I definitely think that we are in a time period right now where people can use a little bit more calm, diffusing, but very intelligent ways of speaking about volatile topics. So with that being said, I just want to say, Madhava, thank you so much for who you are, for your essence, for what it is that you do. And I can't wait to complete the book, Woke. I just have to say it for the audience again. Check this book out. Check the book out, and we'll have this.
You didn't read the whole thing yet. Is that what you're saying to me, Ben?
I did. Yes. I mean,
I've had it with you guys.
I'll tell you what.
Cancel.
I'll tell you what. I am going to read the first thing that comes in this book, and it's the Buddha. Believe nothing, no matter where you read it or who has said it. Not even if I have said it, unless it agrees with your own reason and your own common sense. It's the first quote, the entire book.
That's pretty good, man. But can I ask you, please, to read the very last sentence of the book?
The very last sentence, will do.
Well, I mean, not the appendix.
Well, and then I can say I read it from start to finish. When truth arises, it is never disguised as an ultimatum, a ticket to exclusivity, or a means of manipulation. Truth always appears as a gift to those who are ready to receive it. When you know this to be true from your own experience, it will stand as your proof that reality itself is compassionate. I love that.
Yep.
Love that. I think that's a great place to stop. Madhava, thank you again. I really appreciate it. Did you give everything that people could connect with you on?
Well, yes, I gave everything. And if you like this conversation about getting to clarity, I invite you please to go to Collective Evolution. We did a masterclass based on the book Woke about bias and how to overcome it. And it is, I think, very powerful. And so thank you for letting me plug that. Ben, Gordon, you guys are great. I knew this was going to be a great conversation. And I'm sorry, actually, Ben, I didn't get to see you in person this week, but we'll make a trip out there sometime.
Awesome. I can't wait for it, my man. Well, yeah. I very much so appreciate it. Gordon, really, really appreciate your input, and you did a great job finding all that stuff to put up on the page so the audience can see what we're talking about. I did find that, didn't get back to it, but I did find that Biden quote. His quote was, "Look, the only pandemic we have is among the unvaccinated." I don't want to go back into the topic because the bottom line is, like there's also this overly used thing where we attack the president like the president is the whole administration. Yes, like there's so many things we could get better, but as of right now, there's just way too much focus on like, well, the president said this and the president said that, and it's like, yeah, what are you doing with your own life? Like what are we doing about our own life and bettering it and bettering our community? So we try and stick with a lot more positivity while not ignoring anything that might be a sobering look at reality that we need to look at. So with that being said, I want to thank you, Madhava. I want to thank you, Gordo. I want to thank everybody in the audience for listening and sharing your awesome stories and quotes and some of the questions that you had. We do this every single Thursday, live on Thursdays, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We go live with people that are really here to help us refine the blade of discernment and to just, give us new ways of looking at the world and our own human potential. If you like that, please come back every Thursday at 5 p.m. There's also every Monday, we have Waking Infinity News, and over at benjosephstewart.com, we have the deeper dive section, and the deeper dives are all the things that I technically can't say on YouTube. And so I have all that over at the members section. We're going to start pumping that with much better content. Eventually, Madhava, we're going to get you on an exclusive podcast section, and we'll put all that stuff over benjosephstewart.com. But other than that, man, we're pumping a lot of free content out on this YouTube channel. And we're doing it mainly because this is not only enriching to the people who get the content, but ourselves for being a part of these awesome community conversations. So with that being said, I love you all. I mean it. Please remember that you are the most powerful technology known to existence. Don't ever forget that. Wield it like a human being with a heart and a conscience. And with that being said, catch y'all next time on the Ben Stewart Podcast.